Meet Kerry Muhlestein. Dr. Muhlestein is Professor of Ancient Scripture at BYU and has a PhD in Egyptology from UCLA. He has recently made a series of videos defending the Mormon scripture, the Book of Abraham, from some common criticisms. In the first video, Kerry claims that the surviving papyri, recovered in the 1960s, were not part of the source used by Joseph Smith to produce the Book of Abraham.
He had two rolls, one of them a long roll, and that's the one that Joseph and others refer to as the source of the Book of Abraham. That roll was destroyed in the Chicago fire. And what we can document is that he had already mounted some under glass before people were saying that he's translating from the long roll. So the fragments that we have, they're not what others were saying and what Joseph Smith was saying he was translating from. Anyone who tells you that Joseph Smith is translating from the text around facsimile 1 on the small fragment that we have is just flying in the face of the historical accounts that tell us the source is the long scroll.
Kerry is making the assumption that all of the surviving fragments, including facsimile number 1, were not part of the long scroll, the sole source from which the Book of Abraham was translated. Kerry, did you forget that Joseph translated facsimile number 1? Did you forget that he published both that facsimile and the translation in the Times and Seasons newspaper? Did it slip your mind that the church has been publishing both the facsimile and Joseph's translation of it in their scriptures for over a century? Did you forget that the Book of Abraham directly references facsimile number 1? The book itself states that it was put at the beginning of the record so that the reader could refer to it as they were reading. It claims to be directly related to the scroll it was attached to. Did you forget all of this? No, you didn't.
If we are going to look at the closest parallels, they actually support what Joseph Smith is telling us, because he says that this scene is about Abraham being on an altar and then being protected by an angel from being sacrificed.
See, Kerry knows that facsimile number 1 is supposed to be the depiction of the story of the attempted murder of Abraham that's contained in the Book of Abraham. He knows that this facsimile was used by Joseph Smith in the translation process. He also knows that Joseph tried to translate the characters around it. Sometime after the initial translation started, Joseph, with the help of some others, tried to create an Egyptian alphabet and grammar using the scroll they had been translating from. Their working document, the Kirtland Egyptian Papers, has copies of many of the characters that are on the surviving papyrus that contain facsimile number 1, in the same order. Next to these characters was written what they thought these characters meant. Did you forget about that, Kerry?
It's clear that Joseph Smith and his colleagues were trying to create an alphabet and grammar of the Egyptian language, but they gave up after a while. He has a translation he's received through inspiration, and then he's going to try and piece together how the grammar works. It's pretty clear he gives up on this very quickly. That's just a guess. None of us really know.
No. See, Kerry knows that Joseph attempted to find a correlation between the text of the Book of Abraham and the surviving fragments. The fact that they tried to use the characters on the surviving papyrus to recreate the Egyptian grammar is pretty good evidence that it was part of the source used to produce the Book of Abraham. So, even though Kerry knows these facts, he failed to mention them. This makes me wonder, why is Kerry willing to stretch the truth and omit relevant information in an attempt to divorce the existing papyri from the Book of Abraham? Why is he trying so hard to separate the two?
In this particular lion couch scene, we call it a lion couch scene where Abraham is on this altar. If he's going to be pulled up to be resurrected, he usually will have one arm out. In this case, Abraham has two hands out. It looks like a struggle. I don't know what else you would be doing if you have your hands up like this, if you're not struggling. It's not welcoming something, it's trying to push something away.
Kerry, you do know that those arms were drawn in by a little kid, I mean by someone, in the 19th century, right? That they were not part of the original facsimile? Notice how the upper hand has dots on it, just like the bird to the right does. Notice how it resembles that bird's wingtip more closely than the fingers on the hand right below it. That is because the 19th century restoration of the missing bits is wrong. According to non-LDS Egyptologists, a proper restoration would have had the bird figure, representing Isis, above the figure on the table, with the jackal-headed god Anubis standing at the foot of the table, not a priest with a knife.
His leg is out, indicating that he's moving. So you have Abraham's legs out and moving, and you have a priest in between them. This doesn't indicate someone being mummified. It doesn't indicate someone being resurrected. This indicates movement, and it's hard for me to imagine it's any kind of a movement except for a struggle, an attempt to get off the altar.
Hey, looky here. Other lion couch resurrection scenes where their leg is out and they have a hand up. Maybe there is another way to interpret this scene other than a struggle. Maybe this is depicting the resurrection of Osiris or something.
If he's trying to get on the altar, why would the priest be there?
Are you really taking the position that that figure on the left is the idolatrous priest of Elkanah? Really? What kind of an Egyptologist are you, that you cannot immediately identify that this figure should be the jackal-headed god Anubis? What kind of a scholar are you if you think that there was an ancient Egyptian god named Elkanah? There is no evidence of a god with that Hebrew name ever existing in Egyptian mythology.
I find it fascinating that so many people will say that Facsimile 1 is a standard drawing associated with the Book of Breathings, which is the text that's around Facsimile 1. And they'll say that's the standard drawing with the Book of Breathings.
Would those other people be Egyptologists, non-Mormon Egyptologists, who don't have a preconceived belief system that they are trying to defend? Kerry admits that the text surrounding Facsimile number 1 is the Book of Breathings. He is also admitting that his peers consider the papyrus to simply be part of the Book of the Dead, nothing more than a common funerary text. Why is this? Because there's no reason to think that it is anything else. If the Book of Abraham had never existed, and it had been you, Kerry, who had discovered these papyri, I have no doubt that you would have come to the same conclusions that your peers have.
Let me tell you one of the more fascinating things that we've found. We've found that the ancient Egyptians themselves have associated Abraham with this kind of scene. We have a drawing of a person on a lion couch, the kind of altar that Abraham is on in Facsimile 1. But they say specifically that the person on this couch is Abraham.
Well, it's just too bad it wasn't on the papyrus containing Facsimile number 1 then, wasn't it? After looking up this image, and all of the references to it I could find in the time I had, I could not find anything that confirms Kerry's claim that this papyrus specifically states that it is Abraham lying on the couch. In fact, it looks very similar to other mummification scenes with Anubis. It sure does not look like a struggle between Abraham and the priest who is trying to kill him. However, I think that this is a very interesting point for Kerry to make. In a paper that was published in the BYU publication The Religious Educator, Kerry wrote that it was common for the text and its accompanying picture to be separated from each other, for the wrong vignette to be associated with the text, and for vignettes and text to be completely misaligned on a long scroll. Frequently there is a mismatch between the content of a vignette and the content of the text. This is the same argument that Kerry was trying to make earlier about Facsimile number 1. On the one hand, Kerry is claiming that we should not expect the text and the facsimile to be related. On the other, he is saying that having the name Abraham on the same papyrus as a lion couch scene is a direct reference to the person in that scene. He is contradicting himself. Kerry, why don't you interpret Facsimile number 1 based on the text surrounding it like you do with this one? Why do you have a different standard for interpreting these sources? Is it because the one supports your preconceived belief system and the other one doesn't?
Joseph Smith ties the crocodile that's below the altar in with Pharaoh. And the interesting thing is that just during Abraham's day, a very strong association between the king of Egypt, or Pharaoh, and the crocodile starts to grow. And so Joseph Smith hits that one just head on.
I'm surprised that Kerry would go here. Just like the Chaldeans, who did not exist until over 1,000 years after Abraham, the term Pharaoh is an anachronism in the Book of Abraham. It was not used as a title for a king until the middle of the 18th dynasty, which was several hundred years after the time of Abraham. While the cult of Sobek, the crocodile god, was starting to form in Abraham's day, I don't see how there could have been a strong connection between the two when there was no Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So while there was a crocodile god, I would hardly describe Joseph Smith's translation as being head-on correct.
Another fascinating thing about Facsimile 2 is it has 4 figures on it that Joseph Smith says represent the 4 quarters of the earth. Those 4 figures, as Egyptologists, we typically identify them as the 4 sons of Horus. But as we've done research, we've come to realize that the 4 sons of Horus are actually each one assigned a cardinal direction. They're associated with the 4 cardinal points of the earth. So Joseph Smith hit that one, just nailed it.
The 4 sons of Horus are in both Facsimile number 1 and 2. In the first, Joseph Smith completely misidentifies the canopic jars, representing the 4 sons of Horus, as being the idolatrous gods of Elkanah, Libnah, Makmakra, and Korash. There were never any Egyptian gods with those names. While the 4 sons of Horus were sometimes associated with the directions of the compass, this is not the same thing as the ambiguous 4 quarters of the earth. Directions are not the same as regions.
We find it with little phrases like kolob. That root in many Semitic languages, keleb, is associated with center, or being in the middle. And so Joseph Smith gets this one just right again.
Let's look at the definition Joseph gave for what he thought was the Egyptian word kolob. signifying the first creation, nearest to the celestial or residence of God, first in government, the last pertaining to the measurement of time, the measurement according to celestial time, which time signifies 1 day to a cubit. 1 day in Kolob is equal to 1,000 years according to the measurement of this earth, which is called by the Egyptians Jahoeth, is a similar sounding but different word from a different language that meant something completely different. Evidence that Joseph Smith got it just right again?
3 times in a row, dead center, Joseph Smith hits a bullseye.
I'm amazed that Kerry was able to say this with a straight face. But let's see how accurate his bullseyes are. Joseph translated 12 characters on the first facsimile. According to Egyptologists, he got none of them right. The names are wrong. This scene is wrong. The symbols are wrong. And he names gods that were not part of the Egyptian belief system. Joseph translated 11 figures on the second facsimile. Again, Egyptologists say that none of the names are correct, and Joseph misidentifies every god in that facsimile. In an apparent attempt to restore the missing segments, inverted hieratic characters were copied from lines 2, 3, and 4 of the Joseph Smith Papyrus 11. And if you think that the sun and the stars borrow their light from the revolutions of Kolob through the interstellar medium of Kerry Muhlestein instead of from internal nuclear fusion, please get some help. Joseph translated 6 figures from the last facsimile, and according to Egyptology, none of the figures represented who Joseph said they were, and the scene has nothing to do with the teaching of astronomy.
Facsimile 3 is very similar to a very common Egyptian scene where someone is presented before Osiris on his throne.
Joseph misidentifies Osiris as Abraham. Isis is the pharaoh, Mad is a prince of the pharaoh, Anubis is a slave, and Hor is a waiter. The character above that figure's hand say that it is Osiris Hor, justified forever, not Shulam. Nothing in any of these facsimiles is correct. None of the translations that Joseph provided has been accepted by the scientific community, turned out to be accurate, or enhanced our understanding of the science of Egyptology. But this doesn't stop Kerry. In his videos, he continually makes definitive statements about how new findings in Egyptology are proving links between the rituals of the ancient Egyptians and Abraham.
As we've looked at these kinds of scenes in an Egyptian setting, we find the Egyptians substituting Abraham for Osiris and saying that it's Abraham, sometimes Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but Abraham that is sitting on the throne. Facsimile 2 is the kind of drawing that in Egyptology we call a hypocephalus. One of the things that we've found with this is that, again, the ancient Egyptians associated that kind of drawing with Abraham. For all 3 of the facsimiles that Joseph Smith associates with Abraham, we find that the Egyptians themselves are also associating them with Abraham. So the ancient Egyptians themselves associate Abraham with this kind of scene. They call it a wedged eye. They say that Abraham is a pupil of the wedged eye, and so they themselves associate this with Abraham.
After lots of searching, I was unable to find any non-LDS sources that even hinted at any of the connections or parallels that Kerry was asserting. Since I am not an Egyptologist, I decided to contact some professional Egyptologists, including 3 professors of Egyptology at UCLA, to see what they had to say. I told them about the claims of Professor Muhlestein, gave them links to his first 3 videos, and asked them if he was accurate. Dr. Dileman responded and told me that while he did not have time to view Kerry's videos, he was familiar with the controversy. He said that I should consult Robert Rittner's book, The Joseph Smith Egyptian Papryi, and that he shared Dr. Rittner's views on the subject. 2 other professors of Egyptology also recommended Rittner's book, citing him as an expert on the subject. While I don't have $90 to spend on that book right now, Rittner has appeared in a documentary about the Book of Abraham, where he shared his views.
What this document really is an extended prayer on behalf of a deceased Egyptian priest, which begins with an invocation to the god of mummification, probably, certainly with a picture of the god of mummification, to ensure his continued existence, to ensure the priest's continued existence in the next world. And then it's followed up by a series of statements where, O deified Horus, may you walk as you had done in life. May your ears function, may your eyes function, may the gods receive you. Long series of invocations on this, essentially ensuring that this dead priest is able to function in death as he had in life, but now as part of a company of the ancient Egyptian gods. Abraham is not mentioned once. There's certainly no reason that this particular Book of Breathing scroll should be expanded much beyond the surviving length. I've now read the entire document from the beginning to the end and made out what one could make out on the poor copy of the final vignette. The most that is missing from this text is simply 2 columns worth of Egyptian hieratic and possibly a small vignette. But other than that, there would be nothing more that would inflate its length much beyond its current size. It is both unprecedented and unreasonable to assume that an intrusive text about a completely different matter, a narrative history of Abraham and his descendants, would have been inserted into a document whose beginning, middle, and end is devoted specifically to the resurrection of an Egyptian priest. It would disrupt the document. It would have nothing to do with its content. It would be unprecedented. No other document would have such a thing. And the narrative style of the Book of Abraham does not correspond to Egyptian verbiage. It's not the kind of thing Egyptians would say. They wouldn't say it in that way. And it certainly would never appear in such a context as this. It couldn't possibly be more out of place.
Explanations of each of the facsimiles accord with present understanding of Egyptian religious practices.
I want to be absolutely clear on this. There simply is no justification for the kind of interpretations that appear in facsimile 1 or facsimile 3. They are wrong with regard to the hieroglyphs. They are wrong with regard to the gender. They are wrong with regard to the understanding of what the scene actually represents. And where they are used in the body of the text, they are wrong there as well. In short, there is no historical validity for the interpretations in that book. None whatsoever.
Dr. Wendrich responded that the translation and interpretation of the Joseph Smith documents are a religious rather than a scholarly endeavor, and as such she respected them. I replied to the professor that while I appreciated her religious sensitivities, that Dr. Muhlestein was claiming that the science of Egyptology was proving his religious conclusions and using his PhD from UCLA to give his claims validity. Dr. Wendrich wrote me back, apparently now having watched at least one of Kerry's videos, and told me I was right and that she would discuss the matter with Kerry. The last professor to respond to me was Professor Kerry. I didn't realize this at the time, but she's kind of famous. She starred in her own Discovery Channel series called Out of Egypt, and she's been on the Craig Ferguson show a few times.
Welcome, tall woman! Come, sit!
She sent me the following email. I watched the 3 videos, and I don't agree with any of it. The ancient Egyptians had no concept of Abraham, so I don't know where he gets these comparisons. And no, most Egyptologists do not agree, despite what Kerry says. I know Kerry, but I do not have much respect for his work. Now I have even less. The fact that he is digging in Egypt is even more worrisome. His PhD was awarded before I arrived at UCLA, although I know that Kerry finished his text-based dissertation after only 2 years of Egyptian language training, which is rather laughable. Kerry is just spinning out the same Mormon rhetoric. What is different is Mormons are funding PhDs in Egyptology and biblical studies, and then funding positions at BYU and elsewhere and passing these people off as experts, when they are only ideologically driven researchers, not experts interested in actual evidence. Thanks for sending. It's important to know who these people are. I am very thankful to all 3 for taking the time to respond to me. I really appreciate it. But this is why peer review is so vital in science. It keeps us honest. It prevents us from making unjustified claims and falling prey to confirmation bias. It forces us to support and defend our position with reason and evidence. If we can do that convincingly, then our ideas gain acceptance. Kerry, I know where you're coming from. You want to promote the faith and help those who are struggling with this issue. But you are defending the indefensible, and this is forcing you to become dishonest. You and I are Mormons, and we have been taught that part of our core values are to act with integrity and be honest in our dealings with our fellow men. We're supposed to do what is right and let the consequences follow. I challenge you to be honest and courageous when addressing this issue, rather than to continue to violate our common core values.